Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the LGS Pod, the Soccer Shorts companion podcast, where we try to shine a spotlight on local grassroots soccer stories here in our hometown of San Diego, as well as across the U.S. and around the world. I'm John Cross, the founder of Soccer Shorts, and with me tonight, as always, is my co-host, Dylan Wilson. Dylan, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. It's been kind of a weirdly muggy day. I went outside a few times and did not enjoy it, but other than that, I'm hanging in there. How about yourself?
Doing well overall. I want to, let's see if I can get it queued up properly. Wanted to bring
Yeah, there
this
you
up
go.
for you. I know we talked about this a
Yes.
little bit last week, but we got a couple pictures of you with your
Yes. It was funny
cup.
because Sal, well, I know you know Sal. I don't know if our listeners will know
Yeah.
Sal Ariano, I think is his last name. He was involved with the locals a bit, but he helps run the San Diego Spurs group. And he is funny because he bought this replica trophy, but this picture of it he sent to me, like he just texted me the day prior, was very close up and had no frame of reference for scale. So I thought it was like this full-size trophy that he was
Huge.
planning to be like drinking beer out of. So I was like a little concerned. And then I show up and see this and I realized it made a little more sense as far as using it as an actual cup. But yeah, it was fun to run around with it and just take some fun pictures. So it was a good time.
Yeah, you still riding high from that win?
Yeah, I'd say so. But goddamn, it's been not even 2 weeks and the club is doing their absolute best to ruin that vibe. So that's just part and parcel of the territory, though, I think.
Yeah, well, I think that's part of getting into the summer season, right? And getting into the transfer window and everything
Silly
else. I think all,
season doesn't even
all
begin to describe it.
right. All clubs are getting ready to go through the greatest of hopes and the worst of fears. You got it all going on at once.
It's simultaneously our season and not, yes.
Right. Always. Um, well, we have entered June. June is traditionally Pride Month, and I wondered if you had seen this Tifo that the New York Red Bull supporters did, which I thought was pretty great in terms of,
Yeah.
especially nowadays with all the, and we're going to talk about some DEI stuff a little bit later with the NWSL, but especially with our federal government and the position of moving away from all of this, it was nice to see some of the supporter groups around the country, and they certainly weren't the only ones, have some very prominent displays. I really, what I love, I think, the most about this is replacing the torch, the Statue of Liberty, with the Stonewall brick. So I think that piece, along with the rainbow flag and everything else, I like when supporters still do this. And I know there's going to be some people out there say, as I saw a comment specifically to this, we need to get, I think it was sexuality out of sports or something. And I know people are trying to, get their hits in and stuff, but I don't see how anybody can take any of these conversations as sexuality in sports. Nobody's talking about sexual behavior, but we are talking about humanity, like recognizing and embracing humanity and, celebrating all the things that make us special as humans and getting along together. So I really have no patience for the people who, want to make this into something it's actually not.
Yeah, I think, I mean, you kind of alluded to it, and I know you know this is because we've talked about it, and it's obvious that people who say things like that are at best woefully ill-informed, but more likely they are not acting in good faith, because
Right.
there's no good faith argument opposed to it. So it's not worth spending time, I think, thinking about why they do these things, because the reason is that they want to make you angry. But I want to say too that I really appreciate, I hadn't seen this, so thank you for showing it, but I appreciate, like you said, the brick iconography, because I think in America there's this tendency to try to only look at the peaceful and like quote unquote productive parts of civil disobedience, when
Sure.
in reality Force has pretty much always been a really integral part of it. Whether, and that can be interpreted in a lot of different ways, but a lot of times I think that American society tries to whitewash out those parts of it. And I think that a lot of us who grew up in the last, few decades of relative peace and prosperity within the United States, again, relatively speaking, have maybe not been exposed to the fact that sometimes it is a brick. It's not a strongly worded letter. And I think that America needs a little bit more of that recognition right now, because the strongly worded letters aren't getting it done. So, there comes a time when you need a brick. So I appreciate that kind of, I think that sends such a powerful message in such a small little red, three-dimensional rectangle there.
Right.
Yeah, it was very, very well done. I hadn't seen that yet. Yeah, super well done.
Yeah, simple, effective, got the message across. I don't know who came up with the individual or committee, whatever they came up with the idea, but very well executed. So we know for us, especially in the US, June is usually considered Pride Month, or it's the month it's most often celebrated. I know in San Diego, we kind of extended into July is when we have our Pride Parade, and a lot of athletic teams will do stuff in August. I think SDFC has something planned in August. I don't know when Wave has their stuff planned, although they do a lot of things throughout the year. But unfortunately, in the UK, as we know, I mean, the US isn't the only place that's really targeting, especially transgender folk and specifically transgender women right now. But the UK has, banned transgender women, as we all probably know by now, and that went into effect June 1st. So at the start of this month. So there were a couple articles that I saw. One in the BBC, there was just good. That's the image on the left, just a good background of the ban going into effect and what it entails. But as I was looking through some stuff around the 1st and 2nd of this month, as I'm reading some of these articles, I came across this AP article, which is the image on the right. And on the day the ban went into effect, they had a big tournament for, I think it was for anyone, but it was mostly for transgender women who now no longer have a place to play. They can't be registered through the FA, depending what level they were playing at. So they organized a tournament in London, and I love the image. There's several images in the article, but that was the one I chose to pull out, the no turfs on our turf. I thought was great.
Yeah.
But it was, and I can't, I have to see if I can look up the title because I don't have it in front of me, but it had dolls, like Let the Dolls Play or something like that was the name of the tournament. But they had, I can't remember how many people it was, but 100 people or something show up to play in this tournament. Who knows how that's going to move forward? Who knows what's going to happen in our country with these kind of things? I mean, there is clearly a huge assault, and this is, I know there's people trying to erase these things, but this is specifically why we need to have these moments. And yes, we should be celebrating and honoring people of all types all year around. But it's nice sometimes to have this time to refocus and reset for some people who maybe have forgotten some of these things or slipped up a little bit. It would be better if we lived in a more welcoming world. I don't know, again, why. I'm sure there's lots of reasons for individuals for all the hate, but really felt as I went through my lifetime, being someone who's nearly 60 right now, I thought we were past this. I thought we were, I didn't think we'd be making big regressive steps. I really thought we were going to keep moving forward, and it almost felt like we were snowballing forward in a good way. And now, we certainly have a group of people in our country, in the UK, and other places who really want to erase people, basically. I mean,
yeah. Well,
pretend
and the
they don't
unfortunate
exist.
part of it, among a giant, horrible situation, it's frustrating too because these people are really just a loud minority. Even still, in like very recent polls of the United States, the vast majority of people are either like indifferent or in favor of like trans support and identity. It's not a thing that most people like view as a real problem in society, but it's been manufactured of this thing really in the
Sure.
larger Anglosphere, I would say. And there are larger underpinning reasons for that, namely the fucking Murdoch family, but we're not going to get into that right now. But it's just really gross on a lot of levels. And part of what disappoints me the most, though, is the lack of people who I know better, who will not, for whatever reason, stand up and say, actually, no, trans kids are okay and should be able to do these things. Because, first of all, it's I mean, I'm even just focusing on the kids' sports here because all the articles and threads I've been seeing have been about, the young girls who now have nowhere to play football.
Right.
It's just, I don't know. There's so many different directions I could go with this, but it really just disgusts me. So the science isn't on their side, the social aspect isn't on their side, but somehow, well, not somehow. I know how these loud people, like I said, are a very vocal minority, and unfortunately, there's a large swath of society that would rather just sit by and twiddle their thumbs than tell these people to shut the fuck up. So, I guess that's kind of what we have to grapple with next. But, to your last point, and I'm sorry, I'm trying to keep this from turning into a huge ramble, but I'm only 30, so I guess I'm, been alive almost exactly as half as long. And I had the same impression that, generally speaking, the wheels of time trended towards progress and social progress. And I do actually still think that that's true on a grander scale. But I think the things that I didn't account for are, and you see these throughout history, are the hard ratchets back against progress. And in
Right.
the grander scheme of humanity, I mean, look how far we've come in the last 1,000 years, but I'm not going to be here in 900 years. I don't really give a shit. So I would like things to continue to get better in my lifetime. But I can't lie. The last couple of years have really shaken a lot of my core beliefs about the nature of humanity in the world. And I've had to reassess how I think, the world can move forward. And not that I'm the one to dictate these things, but it's been a big wake-up call to see the society that I thought was, like you said, just continuously moving forward, take such a sharp step backwards.
Yes. So to kind of pivot slightly, but from what we're talking about, because I'll say the arguments that people make in terms of transgender athletes, especially transgender women, is it's a danger. There's a safety issue kind of thing. So I'm going to pull this up on the screen now. Did you see this? That Denver, the new NWSL team in Denver, named Curt Johnson as their new head coach. Curt Johnson, who is named in the Yates report. I mean, this is like, you are a league that focuses on female athletes who have historically, you want to talk about safety and problem issues, they usually are coming from these cis males that are in power positions over them. And, that's where the conversation should be, not on the transgender females who, through any kind of scientific study that we look at, are not the fundamental problem. But we have certainly, and a long history, and the Yates report documents a ton of abuse that happened to female athletes in the NWSL through these male coaches. And yet, Curt Johnson, here he is getting a head coach position in Denver with the NWSL. I just,
Well,
sometimes
like we
I
said,
don't understand how the NWSL can't stop tripping over its own feet. And we're going to talk about something else with the NWSL in just a second as well.
Well, that's a whole other thing. I mean, I think we probably talked about this, and I stand by it. The NWSL does not strike me as a very well-run organization. That doesn't mean that individual clubs within it aren't well-run. I mean, that's not what I'm saying. But the NWSL, from a top-down view, does not strike me as a very well-run organization. But just to wrap up what you were saying there, I mean, we talked about this already, right? It's never been in good faith when they say it's about women's safety or fairness or whatever stupid things they say, because it's not about, you can show them all the data. They're never going to change anything because they don't care. It's not about logic. It's about hatred and justifying that hatred, because it's easier to make excuses than it is to look inward, frankly. I mean, looking inward is hard. I have therapy every other week, and it's something I force myself to do because it makes me a better person, but it's not easy. And people choose the easy path, which is hatred. And so I don't know. I don't know. I don't really have anything else to say. It's so frustrating because there's no way to really engage with these people because there's no good faith to be had, you know?
Yeah. So let's stick with the NWSL and talk about another big story. There was this article here in Forbes. We have the image on the screen talking about the NWSL's most valuable teams. And again, one, I hate these kind of articles about the valuation, especially of American professional teams, because it's so overinflated compared to the rest of the world. And I really, to me, and I guess it's the way I fan, but I don't care how valuable my club is in terms of monetary assets. I want my club to be a well-run club. I want my club to treat its players well. I want my club to represent the community well and balance their books and everything. But I don't care if they're the richest, wealthiest club in the world. But it is important to some people. But that's not really the conversation I want to get into. As part of this article, let me get to the next slide here. There was this comment by Jessica Berman, which I'm only going to read the very first sentence because I think that is really the overall key piece, but kind of, I wouldn't say buried in the article, but in there as they're talking about valuations of these teams. This is Jessica Berman's comment. Jessica Berman is the NWSL commissioner, for those who don't know. It says, if you're a business person and you look at sports investment as an asset class, I do not actually see a world where it could justifiably be viewed through the lens of DEI and social cause. I mean, the people who support your league, the athletes in your league, like, this is what they do. Like, I can't, I'm having a hard time wrapping my brain. I know you said you don't think NWSL is a well-run league. I agree with you. But a statement like that by a female commissioner who, if you talk to some people in this country, would argue just on the fact that she's female is a quote unquote DEI hire. Like, I don't see how you can say that.
Well, I mean, because who she's speaking for. It's the owners, and the
well,
owners
right,
overwhelmingly
certainly
don't support those sorts of things for stupid reasons. But yeah, I mean, I'm going to try not to tie everything to this podcast back to fascism, but we see this time and time again. People think that they can be the good ones, right? Like, they say the right things, and these evil people will give them a pat on the head and let them be on their merry way. First of all, that is some grade A business mumbo jumbo bullshit. It took me like 3 or 4 reads to even understand what she was trying to say with that first sentence. But it totally misses the fan base, but it totally hits the ownership. So it comes back to the same kind of thing you were getting at with the valuations when you say you don't care. Right. And for the record, I don't care either. In fact, I would almost prefer my club is just straight up breaking even, you know, when you factor in like player and staff salaries and everything, because that means every dollar is going back into the club, right? But some people do care, and I'll be honest, I'm not in a mood to like pull punches here, so I'm just going to say that's like some real simp cuck behavior, in my opinion, just to use like the lingo kids are using these days. Because what do you get out of your owner charging you $18 for a beer and like making all this money? Like, so you're rah-rahing because somebody else is taking money out of your wallet? Like, I'm sorry, that's fucking weak. Like, anyway, like I said, I'm not in a mood to pull punches here, but she says these things because she knows she can get away with them. You know?
Well, and it's her audience she's appealing
to.
It's Forbes magazine, but I just don't see how that goes over well with your players, in your league. And that's really your players make the league and your fans make the league. Because if you don't
I
have
mean,
fans
how
coming, you don't have much of a league.
I fear the answer to this question, but how strong is the NWSL Players Association as a union actually? Like,
That's a good question. I do not know for certain. I do not have a good feel for how strong they are.
and I don't necessarily mean in terms of like how cohesive are they as a unit, because I would probably believe they're largely all on the same page. Um, but I mean, how strong are they in terms of like their bargaining position? Like
Right.
that kind of thing. So anyway, that would be interesting to look into, because you do wonder if that would factor into the way that the owners and leadership can feel that they can talk about this too.
Right. Well, let's shift over, since we're talking about greed, and
I
make the
saw
nice
that.
transition to our next one. For those who didn't see, the Seattle Sounders wore the Club World cash grab with the S in cash with the dollar sign. Club World cash grab shirts before, I think it was just their MLS match this weekend. And again, for those who are out of the loop on the story, the way the current contract is for the CBA, the players can share in some revenue pooled together up to $1 million. And I don't remember the exact language, but it's language that was written a few years back. It was before the incredible amount of money that is going to be coming Major League Soccer's way. Like, the teams that are in are guaranteed roughly, just to show up, $10 million. So at most, the players are going to get up to $1 million. And the language they had in the contract was a little more aligned with, depending on a couple of different things, but 50%, splitting the proceeds, 50% kind of bonuses for players and 50%, to the team and or MLS, however they're breaking that up. And the players would like to, work with MLS to, have a better revenue sharing of any money. Because if any of the MLS teams advance further, they're going to get a much larger prize pool, but the players are going to be, they're going to be capped. And that's what's in the CBA. And it sounds like, from what I'm reading, is MLS is holding really hard to, that's what the CBA says. I can't tell you how many times I've seen stories about MLS, kind of asking the players union, like, hey, we need to tweak this a little bit for this thing, like asking for minor concessions from the players at different times. But
Yeah,
I really think this is
actually.
bad form by MLS, who already,
Well,
it just,
what do they care? Like,
what, if they can get away with it, right?
yeah, which they will, to be clear. And I actually think this is a good kind of segue to my last question about the strength of the NWSLPA. I don't think that the MLSPA is a very strong union, and this is a really good example of that. They let MLS push them around when it comes to negotiations for new CBAs. They let them push them around on existing CBAs, and when it comes time to return the favor, MLS stonewalls them. So that's kind of what I mean when I say not a strong union.
Right.
I fully expect MLS will stand hard, stand tall, stand strong, whatever. I don't know which adjective I'm looking for there, verb, whatever. I expect them to keep the money. I don't see why they wouldn't.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll see. We'll see what happens. Let's shift over to some Cup news now. We usually try to do an update on the Open Cup if there is something. And there's not really anything right now, but the National Amateur Cup has been going on, and we did have some surprising news because, again, for people who aren't familiar, there's 4 regions. Don't know what we're doing in our region, which is Region 4 yet. Still trying to wait for information. Same with Region 3, which is the South. Midwest is in the middle of their quarterfinals are coming up to determine their champions. So once we have the 4 champions of the regions, then they will play, and the National Amateur Champion then gets an automatic berth in next year's US Open Cup. Well, Region 1 had their final sets. Let me pull up the screen here and see if I have them both up there. So it was supposed to be the Principian Freedoms against Christos FC. that's how the semifinal results played out. But then, there was an update, there was an appeal, and there was a ruling last Wednesday, so the day after we recorded our last show. And the team that lost to Christos in the semifinals, Westchester, they claimed that there was an ineligible player. That appeal was upheld, so Christos had to forfeit. So now you have Westchester Union is going to be in the final against the Principian Freedoms, and that's coming up maybe this weekend. I can't remember.
That's a bummer.
Yeah, so some drama in the super lower leagues. You get a team come up. So that's one piece of news. Do you have any comments about that?
I mean,
I have another thing.
It sucks, but rules are rules. You can't field ineligible players.
Sure.
So.
Yeah, absolutely not. And then we have a amateur tournament called the Hank Steinbrecher Cup that was started, I don't know, I want to say, I'd have to look it up, I think around 2012. It's kind of like, we talked about the Brandy Chastain Cup, I think, last week, and it's kind of like that. Take 4 champions from your various amateur leagues, bring them together in a tournament to crown an amateur champion, which is different than our National Amateur Cup. And this is kind of the crazy thing about our lower league landscape. We have, a cup that's existed for a very long time, the National Amateur Cup, 100 years. But then occasionally we create these new cups, or to have different people who maybe feel, because of U.S. soccer's, I'll call it mismanagement of our pyramid. And now it's not just U.S. soccer, because it's USASA, the United States Adult Soccer Association, which actually governs all of this. But not to me, not creating that kind of pathway and hoping to oversee how this works. They're just kind of letting things, I think, still almost, I think it's getting better, has been getting better over the last few years, but historically it has just kind of let things like, yeah, you want to start a tournament, go ahead and start a tournament. But we do have this Hank Steinbrecher Cup coming up. We didn't have one last year because the team that was supposed to host it was Tulsa Athletic. And if anybody remembers the story there, they were in the NPSL. They got kicked out of the NPSL or left, depending on, whose side you're looking at. It's why Tulsa Athletic was not in the U.S. Open Cup. So they were supposed to host, being the NBSL champions at the time. But because of all that, they didn't have it last year at all. So now they're having it this year. It's going to be held in New Hampshire. Westchester United, the one team we just talked about that won on appeal, that's going to the finals for Region 1, is going to be there as the defending champion from 2 years ago, right? Because they won it 2 years ago. But then you have El Farolito will be there representing, they're the NPSL champion. And then, it's hard for me to see the graphic right now that we have up on the screen, but you got the USL2 champion and you've got the USSSA champion, which I think is the Houston Regals or something. So again, we have all these leagues, we have all these different things. We don't have coordination, and hopefully that will change in my lifetime. But we do have another tournament there that has some good teams playing it, and there's several this weekend. I know there's several ways you can watch this on YouTube as well. So if you're interested in seeing some high-level amateur soccer, there are a lot of games going on this weekend.
Cool.
All
I'm
right.
not familiar with this tournament. I don't think I've heard of this before.
Okay. Yeah, it's been kind of hit and miss. It's not consistent.
Or is this
what
you're saying this is what they call the National Amateur Cup final?
No, it is.
This is something totally different.
Yeah.
It's confusing.
It's right. It is. It's confusing. And because we have all these different leagues, and sometimes the UPSL champion has been represented, but it's not this time. I don't really know how it's decided. But it is just another one of those tournaments. I think it was done to honor Hank Steinbrecher, and especially if other tournaments people aren't watching, getting the notoriety, you think maybe this is the vehicle that will that will bring more eyeballs to amateur soccer. I'm guessing that's probably what it is. But anyway, these are some good teams. We've seen some of these teams play in recent Open Cups. There's some good high-level soccer here. If you're interested in watching some of our better amateur teams, there's some games this weekend that you can check out. That was my big point. But putting it in context with a little history is why do we have this Hank Steinbrecher Cup? All right. We do have a story I wanted to bring up kind of in our pro rel news, because occasionally we keep looping back to promotion relegation in this country. And I think one of the arguments in this country specifically that people make against promotion relegation is that your club could be absolutely devastated if you get relegated. And those are true. And here is a story, a bad story in that kind of case. So we've got this for Blackburn Rovers Women, which have done pretty well just on the women's side. But now this article is about how the team, the organization, Blackburn Rovers, has decided that they will not meet the requirements. They're choosing not to meet the requirements they need to stay in the second tier. And so they're possibly going to fall down to the third tier, be by default relegated when they shouldn't have been, not on merit. But it's a sad story about really mismanagement and things. And I'm sure this would be an article that a lot of people would hold up to say, here's what's wrong with promotion and relegation. Like, all of these women potentially who've been playing for this team won't have a team to play for. They're going to have to go somewhere else. And I get that. But if you read this article, I will make the argument that this is exactly why we need promotion relegation, because everything I've read about this situation screams mismanagement. And these players, like, you can blame the system if you want, but this, to me, is a clear case of a club not managing things very well and deciding. I'll give an example. As a teacher, former teacher, I guess, I'm now officially retired. One of the years in my district when we were having some financial trouble, and I taught a lot of technology. And so our district also, in the last 2 decades, all districts bought lots of technology and used technology in the classroom. But the new finance person they hired, their solution, because they couldn't keep up with the, as he would phrase it, the broken equipment, the solution was not to hire some more tech people or buy better equipment, because they were buying shit for some of the things and it was falling apart. The solution was, well, let's just stop buying it. Problem solved, right? You don't buy it, you never have to fix it, wash your hands of it. And, it was an old guy. It's like, well, I never had this technology in my classroom when I was a kid. Like, of course you didn't. You're ancient. It didn't even exist. Like, it just, this, but this is what I was thinking of when I was reading this article about Blackburn Rovers women's team, is they didn't care. And the solution is, we would have to invest more money, and let's not do it. And sometimes you can't. But there was nothing that I've read about this that screams, we really tried to make it work. It was more like, this is the easiest way to cut funds and funnel them over and make sure we keep the men's side strong. I could be misreading that, and from some of the articles I've seen, but I kind of, when we talk about pro-rel, because we're both very positive always on pro-rel, but this is one of those things that can happen, and it can affect players, and people can lose their job. But when I read this, part of it is like, why would you want to work for this organization? Why would you want to be a part of this organization? And somebody else who's running their business better is going to move up and fill in that slot. And for all the argument that people make is people lose jobs, people do this, and they can't. Well, it's different if you're a player, right? Players can move. You just know as a player, that's part of your life as a player. You will move and go to other clubs. Not so much your other people who live in the town and work at the club, who are your support staff. That may not be the case. So there certainly is an argument there, but when you have a club that sounds like it's run as poorly as it's been portrayed in the articles I've read, um, I'm like, then they ought to be relegated, and so then give someone else a chance. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I don't even think that you could really point to that as an issue with promotion and relegation, because this club wasn't relegated on sporting merit. It doesn't sound like they were relegated because they didn't want to outlay the necessary financial, whatever that be, stadium upgrades, staff upgrades, training ground upgrades. I don't really know, but that happens here. Like, I guess I wouldn't even see the point of making that argument. Like, that happens here. Clubs fold here. At least in this situation, the club might carry on in a lower division, it sounds like. I don't know. That sucks. I hadn't heard about that. That's really unfortunate for Blackburn. And if I were a Blackburn fan, even if I mostly just paid attention to the men's side, I'd be pretty upset about that, because it reflects so poorly on the club and what the club thinks of its community, which is obviously, in a promotion and relegation system, a lot more relevant, I would argue. All around a shitty situation, but I, like you said, I would think more than anything, this is probably an argument in favor of an open pyramid.
Right. I would agree. Of course, that probably reflects our bias a little bit for the two of us, certainly. But I do think it helps weed out the people who run things poorly, which we certainly can't do in our professional sports in this country. We've seen over the years in every major sport a team, someone who runs their organization poorly. I know you know this very well with John Fisher. But there's been lots of examples over my lifetime of certain teams that were just so bad, and the owner just sat on it, collected the money until maybe they died and the family decided to sell it or something else. But it's there's no incentive to always be good, especially also when you could, barely field a team and get a few good draft picks and then try to work your way back up again and go through these cycles, because if you do worst, you get the best pick. There's really no incentive to constantly try to stay on top of your game, unless that's just who you are as an ownership group, with that team, which we certainly see that too, right? The ones who always want to try to be the best.
Yeah, but it's, there's no incentive if they're not those people. So,
yeah. All right, well, let's stick with promotion relegation slightly. I'm going to move over to the Jagermeister Cup. We had a new slew of games this weekend. Did you happen to watch any of them or see the results? And
I did.
Kind of in that, like, any thoughts about like where teams? Once USL does open up promotion relegation, which teams? It's early on. In 2 years, we've seen in these lower leagues, like teams can go from worst to first or first to worst, with change in players. But I've seen some good matchups, some good upsets, and frankly, for me, not a huge difference in quality of play between the Championship and League One, which I'm enjoying. I'm actually liking that.
Yeah, I would agree. The only game I watched was AV Alta versus Oakland. And to answer your question, I think AV Alta would get promoted. They seem to be playing super well. And on their roster are a bunch of guys who are championship level players, like our friend Elijah Martin and our friend Miguel Ibarra.
Who just got over there, yeah.
So obviously I was rooting for Oakland, but that's a fun story. I like what they're doing there. I think a club I would be expecting to get relegated would be Lexington. I know they moved up to championship because of financial reasons, but they were like the worst team in League One last year, and they're like the worst team in the championship this season.
Yeah.
So I'm not really sure what is going on there in Lexington. I haven't really bothered to look into it. But as much as AV Alta has impressed me, Lexington has not impressed me.
Yeah. Yeah, there's good. There's been some good games. Like, I'm excited, and with all the new organizations that are coming on board, at least penciled in to be coming on board over the next couple of years. Very exciting for the growth of the league, and going to be very interested to see how promotion relegation plays out. But going back to Oakland, here we go. Did you see the
I
announcement?
did see that. Yeah, I like that
Yeah.
hire. He always struck me as the kind of player that I would think would go into management. So yeah, I'm
Well, he was
excited
doing
about it.
the Sporting KC MLS Pro team.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Um,
That's
yeah,
cool.
or MLS Next Pro. My acronyms wrong here. But for those who might be listening, since you can't see it on the screen, Benny Feilhaber has been announced as the new head coach for the Oakland Roots. So he'll be starting there immediately. And the Oakland Roots, Dylan, have not had the strongest of seasons this year.
No,
So hopefully
people have been
we'll
calling
see
for
a bit of a turnaround.
the coach who was recently let go. People have been calling for his head for a while, and the GM as well. So I suspect that this was timed the way it was, not so much because of the loss to Alta in the cup, but because they were waiting to have Failhaber lined up.
Yeah.
So
I'd say, those conversations are happening before they announce the dismissal, because unless you're in an off season, and even then, like, you really can't afford to take
no,
months and months to do a coaching search, like, unless you have someone lined up to step in as an assistant coach that you're okay with. So yeah, usually those things, when everybody's quiet, something's going on in the background until that
definitely.
gets sorted out. All right, let's turn our attention to San Diego. Part of my goal here with this podcast, a little bit besides some of the other history and the other things we do, is trying to bring some awareness to what's happening here in San Diego. We've been focusing on the women's side the last couple of weeks. We're going to continue to do so this week, and then starting in our next episodes, we're going to lean a little more heavy into the men's side in terms of pre-professional amateur teams that we have locally. So in the USLW, a brand new expansion into Southern California for the USLW. We did a whole little thing on the USLW. I don't know, was it last show? I guess it was 2 shows ago that we did that. But we do have a team in San Diego, just one in the USLW. That is the Southern California Dutch Lions. They play at San Diego Academy for their home matches. But if you want to see some good women's teams, so this is the third tier of women's soccer, they're in a league with Capo SC, and Capo SC is, I have never seen them play. I don't know, but I keep seeing results, and they seem pretty darn strong. They played 5 games, they have 5 wins. And if we look at what's coming up next for the matches for the Southern California Dutch Lions, they're playing Capo FC 3 times in a row. 2 of those are home games. They're on the weekend. Again, they're at San Diego Academy. So the first one is this Saturday, June 7th at 7 p.m. at San Diego Academy. Again, to go out there, you're going to see this, no slight to the Southern California Dutch Lions. They're a brand new team in this league, but you're definitely going to see one very strong team. It'd be nice to be out there and root for the local team and see if they can have an upset, but they'll play them again on Wednesday and then again the following Sunday. So this weekend at home on Saturday and next weekend at home on Sunday, they'll have these games. And I don't right now remember off the top of my head how the playoff structure works, but that will start to be sorted out towards the end of this month. But we'll keep you informed and let you know some of the times and dates so you can get out there and see some matches. But yeah, tough schedule for them coming up here over the next couple.
Yeah, that's brutal.
Yeah. I can't remember. I think we need to go here. There we go. So in addition to the USLW, also in the third tier, we have the WPSL that has had teams in San Diego playing WPSL since its beginning. In fact, one of our teams from San Diego was one of the founding members of the original WPSL back in 98, 99, somewhere around there. And that was the what became the San Diego Sea Lions, which was their most recent incarnation before they folded right around the time of the pandemic starting. But here's the league. They have 11 teams. This is a mixture of some teams from Southern California, and then at least six of these are from San Diego. But San Diego Strikers are sitting there in second place with 9 points, and Albion San Diego is in third right now. But the team at the top, FC Premier, now USLW might do this, but the WPSL also does rankings. And the FC Premier is the number 2 ranked team in the West. So they divide WPSL up into 4 regions. So they're the number 2 team in the West behind the Storm up in Sacramento area. And then they're the number 5 team in the nation. So again, we've got 2 very strong teams on the women's side playing locally that you have the opportunity to see, and we have lots of teams that are playing against. So I do not have the schedule for you because I didn't have time to get everything put together, but if you just go to the WPSL website and look and see what games are coming up, there are games. They're coming midweek. They're coming on the weekends. They're really in the thick of the season. I think they only have about 4 or 5 weeks left. Everything usually wraps up about the end of June. All right. We're going to get you out to a game, Dylan?
Yeah,
Any of
sure.
these as I get something set up. Yeah. I'd like to get out there. I haven't had a chance yet. I do have a couple penciled in on my calendar to kind of see, what might work for me, but I definitely want to get out and support local soccer, right?
Definitely.
Support local soccer.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
All right. Our listener feedback. So we did our show on Wrexham last week, and we did get a few comments back, and they were, I think, as you'd expect, kind of split between, I would say most people, at least here in San Diego, don't seem to have any problem with Wrexham. They enjoy, or the people at least are listening to us, like Wrexham, like the documentary, like what it's done and the focus that it's brought. But there certainly were a couple comments that, it's an unfair advantage when you have owners that are media personalities that can leverage that in a way that other owners can't. I can see that just on the surface, but to me, if you dig a little deeper, it's unfair to have Messi on your team, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like there's no fairness, right, in sport in terms of that. You do the best and make do with the best whatever you have in your team, your personnel, and when you can upgrade, you try to upgrade, or you try to get the most out of the people you have, and that's life, right? Not everybody's going to have a Messi on their team.
Well, and I think too that the idea of it being unfair kind of comes from this lens of an enforced parity that we at least attempt to see in American sports. Because in an open system, exploiting what you have to exploit is like the whole fucking point. Right. So, I see what someone might mean by that, but my response would be like, and
all right, well,
a nation state owns the team that just won the Champions League.
Yeah, right. Yeah, talk about unfair advantage, right? That's why we end up with, financial fair play type things, which I think on that sense, I have more, I would listen to that argument more, I guess is what I'm trying to say. That in terms of someone shouldn't just be able to out bankroll everyone just because they absolutely can, or hoard players so nobody else can have them, kind of thing. I really stock up on players. I think there's some things within a structure that you can do, but if you can leverage a little bit, the others, it's not stopping anybody else. Like, we have lots of celebrity athletes who who own, especially as they get into retirement, are starting to own some soccer teams, whether it's in this country or other countries. And they could certainly step out and
Well, and I think
leverage that
a
a little
difference
bit.
too is that a lot of those people, I just off the top of my head, I know, like we talked about Tom Brady at Birmingham City. I know
Right.
JJ Watt is a
Mm-hmm.
minority owner at Burnley. I know that the Blue Co, who own the Dodgers, are the Chelsea owners.
Yeah.
So I, I I guess I would say maybe the difference there is that Rob and Ryan, as far as I know, are 100% owners of the club of Wrexham, so they can kind of do what they want with it. Whereas in the case of Tom Brady, JJ Watt, Blue Co to a lesser extent, because of the kind of unique nature of the Chelsea fans
Right.
owning the
Yeah.
pitch kind of situation. They don't quite have as much unilateral power as maybe Rob and Ryan do, but still, I guess I would argue that that's not necessarily a bad thing, especially when you consider that, like you said, FFP does exist, which I think is a good thing. To be clear, I support that fully, and I think the attempts they're making to revamp it are good. I like the way they're going about it now, trying to copying
Right.
the European continental model rather than the kind of 3-year rolling turnover nonsense they had. That was very easy to game, I thought. So sure, but I guess I just still don't really see the issue. And
Right.
fundamentally, it doesn't bother me.
Well, then let's look at the other side. Since we talked about Wrexham, let's get into this idea of leveraging a documentary and trying to raise awareness, I guess, a little bit, because there is another team in the UK, and not the only one, but the one we're going to talk about today, but a particular team that has had tremendous success running up the pyramid, starting from Sunday League type things back in 1999. And in the span of 23 years, having 12 promotions, which is absolutely incredible. Without celebrity ownership, without anything else, just kind of hard work by the people who run the club. But also within the last 5-ish years, have had a group from the outside, right? So it's not like Wrexham where it's internally produced, right? And they're telling a story because you have Hollywood owners who that's their job is to tell stories, right? So it's different. It's really more the fly on the wall kind of documentary that you have, but have been capturing what's been happening at this team for the last 5 years. And that team is Dorking Wanderers FC. And it is, I think, an amazing story of a brand new club that again started in 1999, and the reasons why they started I think are interesting. We'll get into that in a second. But why they started and then their rise through the ranks, and then now, and you can go watch on YouTube. I mean, there's 5 years of stuff every game, like they do weekly following of what's going on. If you want to immerse yourself in what it's like in lower league soccer in England, like this, if you haven't checked it out, this is the documentary you should check out. If you think Welcome to Wrexham is too Hollywood, go watch this. Like you're seeing the nitty gritty of what happens at steps 1 through 12. Like and for those who don't know, I should probably clarify this just in case. You have the Premier League, you have the 3 leagues of the EFL, so the Championship, League One and League Two, and then you get to the National League, and the National League then is considered step 1. So now we have a different name. So you have step 1, step 2, and you keep going down the pyramid. However far you go, it goes deeper in your city areas than it does in your county areas. But an open, unified pyramid. You can start a team, and you can work your way up. So that's my little introduction. Dylan, what do you have? And then I want to talk a little bit about their beginnings.
Well, I just wanted to say that like you said, it's such a great advert for the Open Pyramid. This is literally a group of guys who were friends and just made a club, and now they're in the step 2 in the 6th tier now. But they were in the National League as recently as a couple of seasons ago in step 1, and mid-table at that. So they were a couple of things going differently from professional league football. So it's an incredible story. And I did want to say, too, though, that to the listeners who are maybe interested, the owner and head coach and chairman and founder of this club is a guy named Mark White. And he is quite a character.
He is, which also helps.
Right, definitely. And you listeners, I assume you're all big soccer fans. Otherwise, I'm not sure why you'd be listening. Have probably actually heard this guy talk before, because he was making the rounds on soccer social media a couple years back for an interview he did, talking about why he doesn't have his coaching badges and why he doesn't plan to get them, even if Dorking were to get promoted. This is back when they were, mid-table in the National League. If Dorking were to get promoted to the EFL League 2, he would need to get his coaching badges, or else they would be fined every single time he coached the team. And he talked about why he wouldn't do that. And so that was going around a lot. I remember that video made the rounds quite a bit. So anyway, that is to say, you'll probably watch this video and be like, oh, I actually know who that is. But yeah, he's quite a character. I could see how he could be pretty divisive. But to me, he kind of lands in the like Stephen A. Smith sort of zone for me, where it's like, I don't take them super seriously, even though they do say very smart things sometimes. But I also recognize they're probably playing a character to a certain extent, and they play that character very well, and it's entertaining. So it's kind of like you find that balance of not taking them too seriously, and you can have a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, it is, I think, a very entertaining series. And again, the series is just from the last 5-ish seasons. I can't remember if they finished 5 or if they're getting ready to start their 5th. I think they finished 5 seasons with Dorking. But as Dylan said, this is a group of friends, 5 friends, if I remember correctly, that were Wimbledon FC supporters. So not AFC Wimbledon, Wimbledon FC. And this was right near the end of Wimbledon FC before they became MK Dons and moved, and things were just starting to go downhill. And these friends, from my sources that I've read, were dissatisfied with where the club was going. They didn't want to spend their time going to matches anymore, and they just decided to do their own Sunday League team. Now, I don't know all the details of if they always had the plan, like, hey, we'll just keep going up, or they did it and said, what the hell? What if we could go up a division? Well, what if we could go up again? And it just kept building on the success. And I'd love personally to get more detail in those early years of really, because right now, they're a club. They played in the National League a couple of years ago. They were in their Wrexham's last season in the National League. So they were in the league together. And, to take what was your team, you go out and play in Sunday Rec League and take it to the National League with grounds and training facilities and academy and everything else in 20 years. It's an absolutely incredible story overall of a club that was able to do that. And there's all kinds of problems along the way, and ground sharing and switching grounds and having potential fines or not being able to meet certain standards at different times. So again, if you're really into the history of Dorking Wanderers, and there's another, actually, I don't know if they still exist, I'm trying to remember, but there's another Dorking club as well that has been around for a long time. I think it appeals to me also as someone who does documentary stuff, that telling the story. And I think that's why I enjoy watching the bunch of amateur stuff. So we'll talk about bunch of amateurs in a second, but do you have anything else to add, Dylan, about Dorking Wanderers as a club?
No, not particularly. I just, like I said, I think Mark White is like a really interesting guy, and not even in like I like look up to him kind of way. I just purely, he's interesting.
He's a character that drives the show.
He is a character.
He really does.
But I also, like I said, I think he makes some good points. And even though he kind of seems like a bit of a jackass, he's a good manager. I mean, at this point, how could he not be? He's managed all the way up through what, 12, 13
Right.
promotions. At
12
some
steps.
point, right? At some point, you learn your way around managing a football team. So, yeah,
Yeah.
if for no other reason, check it out just because the guy's funny. But I really think, yeah, if you check out a bunch of amateurs, um, it's hard not to get sucked in.
Yeah. The only thing I'll leave just to make sure, because Dylan did mention it, and I want to make sure I'm not misleading people. They did make it up to the National League. They were there 2 seasons, got relegated.
Mm-hmm.
They were in National League South this last season, and they were in the promotion playoffs, but they lost their first round match, which actually I think is the latest episode on there, and it's they had to play away at Boreham Wood, I think, and
Yeah.
it was they do a good, if you if you don't really like the Hollywood thing they do in Wrexham, but you really like following the team and getting the feel of what happens in the game, because Dorking and Mark White have let them have, like, he's mic'd up all the time. They got cameras everywhere. They got him in the locker rooms. They got several out on the field, so they do a good job covering the match, and it really gives you a sense of what happens and what it's like at, again, a lower league game. So they missed out on promotion back to the National League this year. So they've had those 12 promotions and 1 relegation. But still pretty impressive, and they're still going through and trying to figure out already, based on the very last episode, how they're going to try to make sure they win the league next year and get back to the National League, because they want to go higher.
Just to give context to folks to how competitive, even in the 6th tier of English football, it is. Dorking finished 6th. And just for reference, in the National League North and South, which is, again, Step 2 or Tier 6, the way it works is the top team is promoted. Then the next 6 teams, so 2 through 7, go to the playoffs, with 2 and 3 getting a bye to the semifinals. 4 plays 7, 5 plays 6. Dorking finished 6th. They lost to Boreham Wood 5 in the first round. Truro City won the National League South this year with 89 points. Dorking finished 6th with 86 points. So, I mean, that's...
Yeah.
You can't ask for a more exciting last day. It looks like even Torquay and Eastborough and Worthing were all ahead of Truro going into the final day. They all lost. So, I mean, what a wild final day that must have been. So just, even if you're thinking like, oh, 6th tier, this isn't going to be that high quality of football. I mean, compared to the Champions League, sure, but it's exciting stuff still. And two,
full grounds.
Yeah, 100%.
And the grounds only hold maybe somewhere between 2,000 and 5,000 at most of these, and still they're full and
they're full,
loud. Yeah, it's fun.
And the other thing I wanted to say too is you talked about them all being mic'd up, or they have the coach mic'd up during the games for a bunch of amateurs. And one of the things I always find the most fascinating for the games they cover is when you get to hear the interactions between the head coach and the 4th referee,
the 4th official.
Yeah, because like you see in games when you're watching like top level and you see them, they cut over to that camera angle. It's pretty much only because somebody's screaming at somebody, right? So
right.
It's like, it's nice.
You don't get all the banter.
Right. These more bantery, respectful interactions. Things even like the coach saying like, hey, he was wrong on that one. I'm not going to yell at you about it, but just look at it later. Tell me you'll look at it later. Yeah. And it's like, that's just not something you like think of. And it's just really interesting to kind of hear that dynamic. I always find that part the most interesting.
Right. Well, so let's switch over to Bunch of Amateurs and then we'll wrap things up here. Bunch of Amateurs is the name of the company, I guess, for lack of a better word, that does the documentary series. They actually do several. And the person who started, and you can go to their website, bunchofamateurs.com, I think. They have a very simple website just to help get you really to their social media stuff. And there's a little history and background of how they started. But Dorking was not their primary team that they wanted to follow. And I think they've done a total off and on of 4 different teams. Dorking just became the one that they were able to keep following because, because I know in doing things like this, that as much as you well, let's take Sunderland Till I Die, is one of those things that as long as you have an ownership group that's willing to let the cameras in, then the cameras come in, you have it. And as soon as they decide no, then it's done. It's not like someone can just come in and film and mic and get all the access. So having Mark White be the consistent thread from the beginning all the way through, and him allowing the cameras in, have really helped the story to be told over the last 5 years, especially for a bunch of amateurs. But they really like focusing on this really lower league. Like, I think the first team they did was in step 7. So that's 7 steps below League 2, right? So and I can't remember the name of the team, but that was who they started, and they worked with the coach, but then the coach left. And then I think if I read correctly, it was the guy's barber from a bunch of amateurs said, "Oh, you should check out this group." And, and just someone who wants to, who now has be able to employ, a couple of people at least contractually to get people out, so you have lots of cameras on match days. And I think someone to help edit now. But it's an interesting story. I can relate a lot to a lot of the things that a bunch of amateurs talk about, because, I've had times where I was just thinking, it would be nice to put like a 2-hour movie-ish kind of a summation of the whole series. But I thought about this when I did the locals documentary, and all told, it probably came out to about 2 hours. But then I decided to chunk it much smaller into chapters that range from 15 minutes to 45 minutes. So these 8 chapters for the locals documentary series, and that worked out a little better. And I know for a bunch of amateurs, it was someone kind of convincing them, and especially because of the pandemic and everything else, because there were all these fits and starts and then jumping back into it, but that you would be better off doing like a weekly YouTube series, so that you can capture everything and flip it quickly. And I know they've described one of the things that was difficult for them is they wanted to tell deeper stories, but YouTube and the YouTube algorithm doesn't really favor like TV show kind of format, longer format. It favors much smaller, quicker, interactive hit style things. So one of the things they've had to do over time is they now have a membership area, which helps cover costs, and they've been able to do better production. So if you watch through the whole thing, you can see how the production quality has improved, especially getting additional GoPro cameras, having better microphones, having just additional cameras at these events. But then you got to take all that stuff and you got to edit it and put it together. It's hard, and I know I've done this. It's hard to flip that around fast enough to kind of really capture, what's happened in one game in a week, and then bring that to YouTube. So I know they try to keep the free YouTube ones short, like sometimes as short as 20 minutes, but then there's a kind of a longer cut. And then depending on what level of membership you are, then there's like a deep cut. You can get like a 90-minute cut for each game, basically. I mean, sometimes there's a couple games in there. It depends how they're packaging things together, but you can get a pretty deep cut with all the locker room stuff and everything else. And they do, on the short versions, I think they could do a good job with narration and clips, just kind of give you a feel of what's happening. And I would love to do that kind of stuff personally, to be able to get out there. I don't know if my body can keep up with the demands of doing that regularly, but I think it would be fun to follow a team and tell the story, and get that inside, that really, inside access, and see what it's like, especially in this country, a lower league team in this country, and what it's like day in and day out, and do it more like a bunch of amateurs, and not even like these hard knocks, whatever kind of shows, which I think they really, like any reality show, they play up the drama for drama's sake, I think, a lot of times, because that gets your casual viewers involved. I'd rather do it more for the passionate soccer supporters, and not just feed the drama because someone said something, catchy at some particular point in time.
Well, unfortunately, an open pyramid would facilitate that much better, because you'd have a lot more options probably. So
It would, yes. All right. Dylan, any last comments here on Dorking United and a bunch of amateurs?
I didn't know that they were FC Wimbledon fans. Which is weird because I'm sure I've read through the Wikipedia page before, and now looking at it, I see that prominently listed there. So I don't know how I managed to miss that. Maybe I just forgot. But that is kind of just an interesting wrinkle, considering that like they were just a couple of years ahead of the curve. They like literally. So yeah, I didn't know that. I thought that was pretty interesting. Yeah, I think the bunch of amateurs. The last thing I want to say too, I think the bunch of amateurs has been covering them since they changed grounds a few years ago, which was I recall at the time was like a pretty interesting dynamic. Just hearing about those conversations as far as the reasoning, the acquisition, the financing. So if you're looking for a place to start and not just dive in at the latest episodes, I'd have to go back and look and see when it was they changed grounds. But correct me if I'm wrong. I think it was just a couple of years ago, and so they covered it
Yeah,
in the series, and it was
right.
interesting, especially given all the loyal nonsense that happened when they folded with the stadium. I mean, like half joking but half serious too. You realize like, oh my god, this is kind of a huge deal.
Yes. And there's, we touched on this when we talked about fan violence in soccer and the couple of podcasts from It Was What It Was, dealing with the 84-85 season in England, and which was arguably probably the worst season in Division One football, just with fan violence and just what happened. And because of that, what happened at Heysel and what happened, a few years later, and blanking out here for a second, but there's a couple of things that happened a few years later. So once we got towards the end of the 80s, there were some serious changes that needed to be made to grounds to be able to meet a certain class and level in terms of safety, fan safety, player safety. Because again, not to digress too much, but one of the things for that season being so bad in 84-85 is the infrastructure of stadia were just crumbling, where fans could literally dismantle seats and kick out pieces of concrete or wooden planks and then use them as weapons, right? So there was a crumbling infrastructure of stadia in the UK. So part of this new time that we're living in of all seat stadia, depending at certain levels, and what you have to have in terms of grounds and safety and inspections is huge to be able to your ground to be certified to be able to go up to a particular level. It's not just how many seats you might have and how big the facility is or locker rooms. There's a lot that goes into it.
So it wasn't just for accuracy's sake. It wasn't that they moved stadiums, but they twice since 2020, when a bunch of amateurs would have started covering Dorking, they've done large-scale renovations to the stadium they play at to meet higher grade statuses as they move up the levels.
As they move up, right?
Right. So it wasn't a ground change, but ground renovation, which still interesting.
And that costs money, right? All of that. Yeah. So how do you finance that?
And you ain't getting the local government to fund it for you like you do in the NFL or the MLB.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So I find all of that fascinating to just Absolutely. To also get a dip into another culture to see how things are done. I would love to see some from other countries as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Like this. Now, I mean, no one has a pyramid system like England. I mean, they just don't. That goes as deep and is as concentrated as you have in the UK. For a number of teams in a relatively, a country for, I guess, all of the UK, I think in square miles and stuff, that it is not bigger. I'm trying to think, it's still probably about 2/3 the size of California.
If that even.
Yeah, to have all the teams and all the levels they have. So the concentration they have is is incredible, right? And the saturation. There's no other country in the world that has that. So, sometimes when we talk about pro rel and we use that as an example, I'll be the first to admit, like, that is clear. It's apples and rocks, not even apples and oranges for this country in the UK. So, but it's still interesting.
Well, and it's that way because it's, we've let it be that way. So, it's not an immutable property of the universe that America doesn't have a robust pyramid. It's a conscious choice, and that's what we're trying to illuminate for our viewers and listeners.
Right. All right, Dylan, do you have any soccer plans coming up for the week? I know we've offered some here on the show.
Yeah, Wave are playing Friday night this week at home, so I think I can make that work. I'll have to double check with some folks, but I should be there. I'm
toying with the idea of going. I still have yet, as I've said multiple times on this podcast, I have yet to go to a Wave match. I've yet to go to any event inside of Snapdragon Stadium. So we'll see. We'll see if I can work that out.
Let me know if you do end up going. That would be good. So,
how about your neck of the woods? You got a big music and creator fair going on there in North Park. Aren't you still in North Park?
I am. Yeah. This weekend.
This weekend. Yeah.
Is it the Adams Ave Festival? What is? I don't even know.
It's a North Park Music Festival and Creator Fair this weekend.
Is that a new thing? I don't think I've ever heard of that before.
I think they combined a couple of things this year.
That would make sense. Okay. Yeah, no, I hadn't heard about that. So it sounds like it'll be a busy weekend.
All right. I'll probably watch a little bit of the TST. I enjoy that for the novelty sake a little bit. But that's something we may want to tackle at another show. I saw that Cesar Hernandez had an article came out today with someone else that is this the future of soccer? These social media, weird tournament, short attention span, crazy kind of things. And I will say emphatically, no, it's not. But is there a place for some of these things, especially in the summer? I think there is. And I think they can be fun, but I can't see in any way that they replace. Because I think part of the problem with the short attention span, small things, is you just never build up the community, or you don't build up the things that are important to sport, and that makes sport lasting. But that's a whole other show to do. So I might watch a little bit of that. I'm going to see if I can maybe make it out to the Wave match, or maybe catch one of the local women's matches this weekend. I don't know. It's kind of busy. We'll see how that works out. But in terms of programming notes for us, we are coming up into the next 3 weeks of a little bit of craziness in both our schedules. So we will not be going live at 6 p.m. next Tuesday. Now, we're going to go, because we always just record the show live. I don't know when we're going to do it. It might be in the morning on Tuesday. It might be on Wednesday, but keep an eye out for that. We'll try to get it posted up on YouTube so you get the announcement. But with our schedules, we're just going to have to shift when we normally do it live, and then and that's because I have a schedule conflict with something next week, and then Dylan has a couple weeks scheduling conflict, and I've working on a couple of guest hosts coming on, so we might be back at 6:00 on Tuesdays on those next couple of weeks in June, the last couple of weeks, or we might have to go a little bit later, or possibly a different day, whatever we can accommodate with our guest host schedules. So just a heads up for that. All right, Dylan, any last things? Am I missing anything here?
No, I think you got it all.
All right. Well, again, remember, you can always follow us on Blue Sky at soccershorts.bigpinedigital.com. You can follow us here on YouTube at for our Soccer Shorts episodes that we've had, our previous documentaries. You can find them at BPD, which is short for Big Pine Digital, at BPD Soccer Shorts on YouTube. And you can find us here, which now I can't remember, and I've lost my notes of what our actual name is for this YouTube channel. So you can search for Local Grassroots Stories, and you will find it here on YouTube. All right, Dylan, I think I'm getting tired and not making much sense, so I think it's time to wrap our show up here.
Sounds good.
All right, Dylan, thank you for being here. Thank you, listeners, wherever you are and whenever you're listening to the show. And remember to, I don't think we did our call to action, our question of the week. We did a couple documentaries over the last 2 episodes. Like to know what your favorite, can't miss, best soccer documentaries are. So you can send us a text link if you're listening to this on any of the podcast feeds, or just drop a note in the comments if you're watching us on YouTube. Doesn't have to be following a team like we talked about for Wrexham or Dorking Wanderers, but what are your all-time favorite soccer documentaries? We'd love to hear those. And with that, Dylan, thank you very much. We will see you next week at some unknown time yet, and then we'll catch you again at the end of the month.
Sounds good. Have a good night, a good week.
All right. Bye, everyone.